Welcome, everyone, to What the Force, and welcome to the finale of Season 2 of The Mandalorian, Chapter 16, The Rescue. And this is Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim. And joining us, coming back, somehow, Alex Kane has returned.
Thank you so much for having me.
Unfortunately, Ty Black, although she had planned on making it this episode, is unable to for personal reasons. We love her. We wish her well. She is okay, just unfortunately could not make it. But with the return, somehow, Alex, you have returned.
Dark science.
Dark science, hand waving. We are planning on having a very, I hope, awesome discussion about the finale. And I hope you stick with it no matter what, because there was some complexity to this episode. I remember getting out of it and being like, I liked it, but I'm also confused. And sometimes that confusion is good because I work through it and I'm like, this is what they were doing. And sometimes that confusion is bad for me personally. And I have to say, like, this show looks at things from a mythic and genre-specific lens, but I still expect the story to feel earned. And right now, I feel like I've just guzzled a vat of salted caramel, which is like one of my favorite things. And it's salted and caramel, and I love it, but now I don't feel so good. And so we're going to get into all of that. How are you feeling after this episode, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, similarly, I think that, it's one of the, it starts off as one of the stronger episodes of the season in some ways. And I think it's the better of the two Peyton Reed episodes. I think that the first 90%, I was, really enjoying myself. You called it like a McDonald's Happy Meal. And then sort of the last 10%, it started to make me feel unsatisfied. And the more I think about it, the more I feel that way. So,
yeah,
it's not, it feels like an ending in structure a little bit. It wants you emotionally to feel like it's like, but really it can't possibly be the end of sort of Mando and Baby Yoda. There's no way.
I'm just going to go into the summary, and I apologize up front if it's not as good as Ty's, because I wrote it and she normally writes them. So if they're not as good, you know why. But the summary of the episode is, we start out with the Mandalorian and team capturing Dr. Parshing aboard an Imperial shuttle. Kara confronts the pilot holding Parshing hostage, who taunts her about Alderaan being destroyed. Mando and Boba Fett go on to gather Bo-Katan and Koshka Reeves in a cantina on some unnamed planet to convince them to join them in rescuing Grogu. Bo-Katan reluctantly agrees when given a chance at Moff Gideon and the foretold Darksaber. The team uses Dr. Parshing's information about the light cruiser, and they find out that they are up against a legion of third-generation dark troopers that are now fully droids. With the plan initiated, the boarding party in the Lambda shuttle, chased by Boba Fett and Slave One, lands in the docking bay of the light cruiser at full speed, while TIE fighters attempt to go after Boba. The team exits, Din heading towards Grogu, while Fennec, Bo, Koska, and Kara head towards the bridge. Meanwhile, Moff Gideon orders the activation of the Dark Troopers. As they slowly start to boot up, both groups head towards their goals. Din is trapped with a solitary Dark Trooper who escapes Din's attempt to close the doors. The Dark Trooper hammers Din hard, thoroughly tenderizing him as he manages to remove the Dark Trooper's head with the Beskar spear. Just before the rest of the Dark Troopers are about to break through the door, Din manages to space them. Din goes on to find the cell which Grogu is kept, which also contains a threatening Moff Gideon. Din pleads with Gideon to give up the child. He doesn't care about the Darksaber. Gideon seems to acquiesce and then suddenly betrays the arrangement. Din and Gideon go on to fight spear versus saber until Din is able to force Gideon to surrender. Din, Grogu, and a bound Gideon join the team of ladies on the bridge. The Dark Troopers have managed to fly back aboard and start towards the bridge when the team and Gideon are holed up. Gideon sows the seeds of doubt between Bo and Din, as the Darksaber must be won in combat. Bo will just not take it. The Dark Troopers advance on the bridge and are about to make it through when a mysterious X-Wing lands in the docking bay. A hooded figure with a green lightsaber mows down the Dark Troopers, and Din sees Grogu's reaction and allows him to enter the bridge. Din asks the cloaked figure if he is a Jedi, and the figure confirms that he is. The figure in black calls to Grogu to come to him, but Grogu doesn't want to leave without having Din's permission. In a touching moment, Din and Grogu share a goodbye where Grogu touches Din's bare face. Din promises that they will see each other again. Grogu has a cue to beep conversation with the stranger's droid, and then the stranger says, "May the Force be with you," and leaves with a cool looking blue droid. Was that a good summary?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. God.
It is a cool looking blue droid. I love that droid.
I love that droid so much. Okay. Oh God. We kind of already went into like how we felt overall about the episode. I really am struggling with parts of this, so we're going to go through kind of the big things and then we'll dig into a tiny bit of the genre stuff, because again, the genre stuff is sort of just not the focus. It's not focusing or paralleling Western movies in particular this season, and sort of more general Western occasionally. What did you think of Parshing's return? I always thought he's kind of a good guy and just sort of goes with whoever's threatening him.
Yeah, like he's just doing his job what he's sort of went to college to be a cloner and ended up, he could only get hired on at the Imperial Remnant base. Apparently that's the only place that was hiring. So he wound up being like an evil mad scientist. But I mean, he's, like the actor's likable, and he's not like he cares for Baby Yoda's well-being, Grogu's well-being, he like, he's not like Gideon or Werner Herzog's The Client. He's sort of protective of the child in a way that you wouldn't expect like an imperial dark scientist who's trying to bring back the Emperor might be, or whatever they're doing on Camino and with the cloning lab on Navarro. We never really got quite there. There's sort of like hand wavy Snoke residue there, but I don't know, he ultimately doesn't pay off yet too much, because we didn't like end up going to Camino or anything, or really like,
but I mean, he was more than willing to give them all the information about the light cruiser.
yeah
it was weird.
He's sort of like Hux, like, I'm the spy. No, I don't know.
And then we have like this very classic like Western type, two strangers walk into a bar and everything stops for itch, and then it's like, oh yes, they're there to meet the other armored people in the corner, Bo and Koska just hanging in there out there eating their food. I really appreciated the fight between Boba and Koska, because they seemed very equally matched, but also it was like, yes, Mandalorians are stupid and fight all the time. And so like to prove they're like whatever, like we saw that especially in the Covert in first season, like Mandalorians will just like suddenly break out in a fight because reasons, and that seemed very on brand. So it's like, you call me not a Mandalorian, it's like, I've seen your face everywhere because you're a clone. And he's like, no, I'm Mandalorian, but I did need to be called one, and then they fight, which proves that they're both Mandalorians. Like, I don't know, it worked for me.
Yeah, Favreau and company have done a pretty good job of like walking the line, like especially Robert Rodriguez when he directed his episode, walking the line between like Boba Fett's like this serious, competent edgelord badass, and then like the fact that Mando's like, nice shot, and he goes, oh, I was aiming for the other one or something like that. They poke fun at Boba Fett, which is what you have to do, but he is still cool and he is still likable and
yeah.
Wow. Yeah, the rehabilitation of Boba Fett in this season has been something else.
Yeah, it's been.
How did we get here?
It's been pretty amazing. And then we move on to kind of like the planning for the mission and the execution of that, which I mean, it was all fine. The action was fine. It was a lot of cutting back and forth, but I'm happy that when Din was like the focus of it, they stayed with him for a long period of time,
Yeah, this episode sort of seemed to address the elephant in the room, which is that like a lot of people have been watching this season going, isn't this supposed to be about the Mandalorian, Din Djarin, and like his journey? And, occasionally like it has kind of veered away from using him as the focus and just making it about like Grogu and then, the guest of the week, and then, but here Pedro, well, in last week's episode too, Pedro finally got to really shine and sort of act his ass off a little bit. And,
yeah.
It's nice to see him take the helmet off. And
anytime like the character is the focus of the episode, especially when Grogu is involved or like he's seeking Grogu, he just shines as a character.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy the women fighting their way through the ship?
Yeah, I had a note about that. I remember when Avengers Endgame came out.
Oh my God, I made that same reference in my head.
Really? Yeah. When Endgame came out, right? Like we had this sort of like girl power moment where all the like, women Avengers sort of like got together and they're like, we're going to help out this Peter Parker kid who doesn't know what the hell he's doing. And, it was like badass, but like I think women on Twitter were kind of like collectively rolling their eyes at how like focus tested and corporate it felt. Mm-hmm. It felt very. People who don't like to see representation and diversity in film will often say things felt forced or unnecessary. And in Endgame, the sort of like girl squad scene did in fact feel forced.
Yeah.
And here, props to Peyton Reed, who I think did a really good job in particular with Ant-Man 2, Ant-Man and the Wasp. I thought that was a really fun movie. I liked it a lot.
Mm-hmm. This felt better than that. It still felt a little like, oh, all the girls have to be together. Like, why didn't Boba land and join them? And then
Boba, yeah.
Right? Like he could have joined them. So where did Boba go? Sure. He just yeets off into hyperspace and never to return. You'd think that he'd want to come and pick up Fennec. It just felt a little like, okay, where's Boba? And I'm going to come back to that later because I think it's important to address that is one of the big indicators. This was easy choices that were being made. Okay.
Yeah, if it was an episode of Scooby-Doo, it's sort of like, the more you think about it, it's like Velma and Daphne are off like doing the job, solving the mystery. And Fred's like, I'm going to go to Disneyland. I'll catch you guys later.
Yeah, exactly. Like, where did he doesn't care? Like, literally, he said, until you get the child back, I owe you my life or whatever, right? Like, I owe you this. And he just leaves?
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I gave you Fennec, it'll be fine. It's like, okay, yes, Fennec is awesome, but like, where'd you go, buddy?
Like
we don't have a ship. We destroyed the shuttle. We don't have a way off this thing if it gets destroyed. If they like decide to blow it up, how are we gonna leave? Okay, bye. Okay. The Dark Troopers were scary as all get out, and I'm gonna get into the symbolic stuff with them later, but I literally, like, my heart was pounding at the Dark Trooper, like when he made it through, when he started fighting him and he started like hammer meets nail to Din's head into the wall. I was so scared.
Yeah. The design is like an interesting alchemy between like early Macquarie Darth Vader.
Yeah.
And then like the early Kylo Ren concept art, like the Jedi killer concept. And I dug that. The music there is very Terminator 1 and 2. Like You know,
It's
the sort of
very,
like hammer on metal. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's very scary.
Yes.
Din defeats the Dark Trooper and heads on to get Grogu. And I really love this moment where he's like, I don't know, keep the saber. What the hell does that matter to me? Give me the kid. And that felt so like earned and good and beautiful. And then he fights Gideon and doesn't kill him. And I was just so proud of that choice that like, and then bringing him back to the ship all together. And he's like this like bound person and they'd never kill Gideon. I really enjoyed the fight with the saber and the spear too. I thought that was really awesome. Well choreographed. Yeah. I also like that he stabbed things with the spear. I mean, that's how spears work. And he actually stabbed a lot of things this episode with the spear, but purposefully wasn't trying to kill Gideon. What did you think?
He wasn't just sort of like using it like a lightsaber.
Yeah.
He was in fact using it the way like it seems like it would be intended to use. And I saw a lot of, like Return of the Jedi parallels with Gideon being sort of like on the floor, you know, like Vader is after like Luke cuts his hand off. And just sort of like, but of course Gideon being ever sort of the calculating kind of like Thrawn like sort of villain who's just like matter of fact about everything and sort of playing this chess game in his head. You know, he doesn't sort of surrender and say like, okay, I'm good now, like I'm Ben Solo and I'll help you guys or whatever. He's still like bad, but yet, you know, as the good side we can still be like, okay, but like we don't have to be judge, jury, and executioner and like chop his head off, like, you know what I mean? That was a nice development that he sort of like is being taken into justice. You know, that's something that doesn't really happen in Star Wars. So unfortunately, you know, people usually end up on a funeral pyre or fading into nothingness or falling down a dark pit, you know, so and over again.
I'm still hopeful for Gideon redemption. I would still like to see that happen. I'm also fully okay with him being, you know, captured and going to prison. I'm also okay with that. You know, I just would hope for some sort of like, at least I would hope for some sort of way to, you know, redeem him, you know.
That'd be cool.
Pedro Pascal's appreciation forever. He acted the hell out of any moment he used his voice or his face in this episode.
Yeah, it's like in season 1, I think a lot of times it was sort of one of the two stunt guys, you know, in the suit. And I think Pedro knew that like once the mask came off at any point, like he had to really like show up for work those days. And, like he really did. Everybody was sort of praising last week's episode for Bill Burr and like that character, which I mean, like fine, but for me, the star of the show, even in that episode, was Pascal, like helmet off and just being sort of like emotionally naked for a moment. And you really feel that whole, like as a parent, and like the first thing he says is like when he gets Pershing into custody is like, is the kid alive? Is the kid okay or whatever? And, you know, that totally like rings true, you know?
I didn't refer to the character as Luke Skywalker purposefully when I did the summary. And the reason I didn't do that was to actually call into question some of the choices that were made in bringing in Luke. And I think that Luke was absolutely the right choice from a story, from a broad timeline perspective. There isn't really that many Jedi left, really. Like there is literally one. You know, actually there's two, and I'm going to bring it to that in a moment, right? So I love Luke. Return of the Jedi Luke, and literally before we were recording, Alex and I were talking about how like these two characters, Luke and R2-D2 coming on screen, are like our kryptonite from a fandom perspective. Seeing them together, like how we saw them in Last Jedi, are absolutely like using them in a way that gets right to my heart, like right in there. And this Luke is my Luke. This is the Luke I fell in love with when I started watching Star Wars. a million years ago when I was a tiny little child laying on the floor, you know, watching Star Wars above me on my, you know, TV with my Betamax tapes. That is the Luke, right? Anytime that you bring a big character into external properties, it always has to feel earned. Dave Filoni talked a lot about this when he brought in Vader in Rebels. And there was foreshadowing to bringing the character in. And watching the episode, I loved him. I love Luke. I love seeing Luke. Like, he is so much of Star Wars for me. But as soon as I finished watching the episode, I was like, why don't I feel good about this? And even seeing R2-D2, who is literally like my favorite character in the world. I love him so much, and I love the interaction with him and Grogu. I'm like, do they know each other? Oh my God, they might know each other. R2 might know him. And it like made me like actually very upset because I'm like, oh my God, Grogu and R2 can like share memories. R2 has nobody he can share memories with, but yet I don't feel good. And it was really summed up for me in a post actually that film critic Hulk did on his Patreon, and he made it like publicly available. And it's all about how anybody, any writer can pull out Luke Skywalker and get that sort of reaction from me, an OT kid. Anybody can. But newer fans, and I know a lot of fans who Mandalorian is their Star Wars. They haven't watched the other shows. It was too much of a steep hill to try and climb to get into Star Wars and start to love it. So they watched the first season and were really pleasantly surprised that they could just watch Mandalorian and not know anything else about Star Wars. Suddenly, season 2 comes and they're confused. They don't know who these people are, and nor are they interested in necessarily finding out. Maybe they are, like they want to go back and find out who Ahsoka is, but they could just read that on the internet. Nothing is emotionally pulling them towards the rest of the saga. Luke Skywalker showing up is the right choice, but it has to feel earned. It has to make sense, and it has to work. And although I think it makes sense, I don't know that it was earned in the moment. And how I can tell this is all reliant on meta pop culture knowledge of Luke Skywalker, that he exists in Star Wars, that even people who are new to The Mandalorian will recognize Luke and be okay with the choice. It relies too much on the meta and means nothing to Din Djarin in the moment that he is that character, other than that he is the Jedi. He doesn't even ask for his like name, which felt so weird. A kid I know, through Josh Johnson, his son, actually, who had seen all of Rebels, asked if that was Ezra, because Ezra Bridger has a green lightsaber, very similar to Luke's. And it could have just been as easily Ezra that showed up and would have made just as much sense in the moment, being unearned. So I just question the choice. Like, was it something that they were like, Flash! Luke Skywalker, yay! And didn't want us to notice the choices. And how I know that this was a very easy choice for them and they didn't do the work was because Boba disappeared, like I said before, which made no sense for his character in that moment, and never came back because Luke knows Boba, and that would have been conflict they would have had to have resolved in the episode. So he's just gone because that's the easier choice. There you go, Alex. That was my rant.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. I think that I think Paul on Twitter, who goes by like the handle of T'Challa Fett, he was talking like last night or the night before about wanting it to be Mace Windu maybe, and that would have been a similar sort of thing where like, you know, there's some baggage there, and like, you know, he killed Boba's father, so you'd have to hash out that, and there's like always potential for these various characters. You know, people talk about Cal Kestis from Fallen Order, but like the TV audience isn't going to know some guy from a video game, probably,
It's the easiest choice to make. You throw in Luke Skywalker, it is the easiest and best choice, especially for the timeline.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But where is the earning of that in the story from the character's perspective? And I just don't see it. I don't see it as a parent handing over my son to random Jedi that shows up.
Yeah.
Either way. And it's like they ran out of time. Or they just didn't want to write it and they relied too much on the legend of Luke Skywalker, which makes me sad.
I think, they started building from, to this with the Ahsoka episode where she said, take Grogu to the Seeing Stone. And, if there's a Jedi out there somewhere, he'll come find him. And so when that moment happened in the Ahsoka episode, the first thing your brain does is oh God, I hope they don't mean Luke Skywalker, because that would be the easy, obvious thing. And then your brain goes to, Ezra and Cal and maybe Mace Windu's alive, blah, blah, blah. And, there are different routes they could have taken. A new character was kind of what I thought might happen. But yeah, Luke is like the painfully obvious sort of, a fan fiction writer wouldn't choose Luke because it's just so the most boring choice you can make. But
yeah. A person playing with toys, or like me when I was a kid, when I was learning how to role play Star Wars, I role played Luke or Leia, right? I was role playing those characters in the West End Games version of the game, or I had those characters interact with me in the world. But it always has to feel earned that character comes in, and you have to use them sensitively, and you have to be careful with them, just like Dave Filoni said. And it's weird that Dave Filoni would have said that about Vader and not about Luke. I'm very interested in watching the gallery episodes to understand the choices that were made, because this one feels very thin from a choice perspective, even though he is the right choice, he is the only choice. But internal to the world of the show, did it matter to Din who showed up? No. Did it matter that he actually say his name and where he was taking him and when he would get him back? Maybe. I don't know. It could have been Ezra just as easily.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know. Sorry.
I think back to my interview with Walt and Mitch, who wrote the Battlefront 2 campaign story.
Right. I was thinking about that moment in Battlefront with him. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
You've got the Dave Filoni designed compass that is in both the video game and in The Last Jedi. And so you get this sense of Luke was on a quest and you can draw a dotted line from here to here, and you really buy that he would be on a planet sort of searching Imperial bunkers for Jedi and Sith artifacts.
But you run across him.
Yes.
You run across him. He doesn't come to you. That is the difference between I'm on my journey and I run into a demigod, and Deus Ex Machina brings the demigod to me.
Yeah. And crucially, Del Meeko, the Imperial guy with a heart, in Battlefront, he says, "Wait, I know you. I know who you are." And he doesn't say you're Luke Skywalker, because that'd be cornballish, but he knows it's an encounter with Jesus or something, and Luke's
even having Boba Fett there might have actually helped, right?
Yes.
And he said, "You're Luke Skywalker," and he looks up and says, "Yes, Boba Fett. Do you want to make a deal out of this?" That would have felt earned, because then at least Boba Fett knew him and knew who he was and what he was all about.
Yeah.
That actually would have probably saved the episode for me.
Boba seeing Luke and getting very angry for a moment, and Luke showing him compassion and saying, I'm sorry what happened to you in that desert. That was probably hell. And I hope that your life's gotten better in the last 8 years.
three lines of a show, and I probably would have been fine with the choice overall. But from a story perspective, it doesn't feel earned to me. And And it's hard. So I'm going to link to Film Critic Hulk's massive post because he explains it more eloquently than I possibly could. But I sought stuff out when I was struggling personally with the choice, even though, like, I want to live in the universe with Luke Skywalker and R2-D2. My favorite Star Wars book is The Legends of Luke Skywalker. I love them, but I don't love this.
Yeah, and it starts off feeling similarly, right? Where like he is sort of this, the man in black, this like shadowy stranger. It starts off feeling like The Legends of Luke Skywalker, but then he takes off his hood and it's a moment crafted for the audience's benefit and not the story's benefit,
Relying on meta knowledge is the worst way to tell a story.
I think we can point to Solo, right? And like Solo has that weird Darth Maul cameo, and like it's like certain people are not going to know who that is, but like within the confines of Solo's story and Solo's screenplay and Kira's arc and like that sort of seedy underground world with the criminal cartels, it just sort of works, and you like don't dwell on like, wow, Darth Maul really ruined Solo for me. Mm-hmm. But this in the context of like The Mandalorian as a TV show that doesn't really star Luke Skywalker, this is like a huge, like, just, throwing a boulder in the pond. Like it's just so weird. It's so
cannonball.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's so disruptive and like,
but it's flashy, and it's like you said, like it's a giant Big Mac meal. Extra large fries, extra large Coke. You down it all in 1 second. You're like, oh, I was so hungry. You eat it all, and suddenly you're like, I don't feel so good. Why?
Yeah.
You were so hungry, right? But it has to feel earned. And like, I know I'm going to keep on saying that, but like, it's just because like I beg of people to think these things through, and like creators, please, 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 please have people question decisions that rely on meta knowledge of the Star Wars universe. I loved the Battlefront 2 Luke entry, by the way. I think that was a good way to use Luke.
Yes.
I personally struggle with the separation with Din and Grogu. I don't feel like he would ever give him up that way, but separations, and we're going to get into this in kind of the symbolic and mythic area, separations are very important in journeys. So if he is coming back to Din, which he promised he would, then it's okay. I still think that Star Wars has a mother death problem, and they need to figure that the hell out at some point, because it hurts still that mothers are constantly separated from their children, and it's like, okay. And if Din gets his son back, it'll be like, it's just a mother problem now.
For the last like year or so since a certain movie came out, I've seen a lot of fans say like when they get into a new story, they just want to know that things are kind of going to be okay by the end, And I feel that way about this episode. I think this episode works really well if we know that Baby Yoda is going to see Din again. And even more so if Mando's going to end up going back and like settling down with Omera and not just like dying in battle for Mandalore, a planet that he like
doesn't care about or isn't cool with. Like he doesn't care about.
Yeah. They started sort of teasing at that stuff, at like the idea that the Mandalorian covert, that the tribe, as they called it, the tribe that he was a part of, the Children of the Watch or whatever, like they sort of have begun teasing the idea that he's very much like sort of part of a splinter group that's very different from like Bo-Katan and all the Mandalorians from like the sort of Filoni stuff, but like. Yeah, they haven't really dealt with any of that. It's all just been sort of like, hey, you seem pretty cool and useful. Like, I need your help. There's a cute kid in need. Let's go save him. But I just kind of want things to quiet back down again and get back to that sort of season 1 scale of like, dad needs to start dating again with, just that weird sort of thing where like we've gone from this really like small, like, Rick's episode 2 with like the sand crawler and the mud horn and the egg,
and how weird that was. Like, oh God, it was so weird.
It was just like, here's like the 3 really big sequences that are really symbolic. I'm loving these characters, to like, okay, now it's like a battle for reclaiming our homeland, which isn't really Din Djarin's homeland.
I mean, it's still like, and I'm going to get into that in like the mythic stuff, because I do think that he is still seeking community and seeking a home. And much like when you talk about sacred stories, like the Israelites, like wandering through the desert with Moses, like literally they don't know where their home is, but they find it. And it was where they were originally from in the first place. So like all of that is fine. But the heart of the story is Din's relationship with Grogu, right? And I feel like I've mentioned this quote before, but like Ariana Huffington said, choosing to have children is choosing to have your heart walk outside of your body. If his heart is out there and not with him, like that's where that pain and that conflict will be. And that's going to be important if we know they're going to be back together at some point. Right? But if this is the end of Grogu in the story, I'm not really interested in Mandalorian going forward. Just the fighty stuff doesn't matter to me. The character and the dramatis of the character's change and growth matters to me. And he only does that with the person that he is loving and centering around himself. And yes, this loving Grogu has taught him to love others, but his heart is broken when Grogu leaves. And that was the end of the show. Like literally Peyton Reed's credits show up. So the after credits scene is bonus selling us on the next season. And let's talk about that.
The book of Boba Fett. Yeah.
Yeah. Boba Fett shows up back at Tatooine. Why do we always have to go back to Tatooine? I guess we do, because it's sort of like the holy land of Star Wars. He shows up. He kills Bib Fortuna, R.I.P. Bib Fortuna. We barely knew ye. Bib Fortuna had become very accustomed to basically taking over Jabba's spot.
Yeah.
But the throne itself that Bib was sitting on actually had in Macquarie font, Boba Fett written in Macquarie font. So was Boba ruling here before he decided to leave?
Before he wound up
chasing after his armor?
Yeah, often the Tuskens disguised and stuff. Yeah.
I don't know. He's got unfinished business on Tatooine, and that's what we're saying. But we're also saying that the Book of Boba Fett, because like Mandalorian chapters, Book of Boba Fett, is it its own show? Is it the 3rd season of The Mandalorian? I don't know. And this confused me a lot. And I hope for some clarification from an official source, because I'm like, this season was basically the pilot for a Boba Fett show / Ahsoka show / Rangers of the New Republic show. Yeah. Right? But it wasn't Din's show except for a few bits of the season. And that's hard to take as a person who loved season 1 of The Mandalorian so much.
I think the first episode of season 2 was like, wow, this feels like season 1 did, but a little bit bigger and like more exciting, and like, okay, bring in the Boba Fett armor and, play around with the universe in a way that makes sense. I thought the first episode of the season was really strong and good. And, I loved Cobb Vanth. I thought, Oliphant was great. I loved Frog Lady's whole thing for the most part, except, the more controversial bits were a little iffy, but, yeah, I think that it starts to feel like the world of like comic books, right? Where like Mandalorian season 1 was like a new series. It's like a jumping on point for like new readers. And then season 2 starts to be like, okay, now we're like pulling in all this lore that like a lot of families who subscribe to Disney Plus are not going to know who the hell Grand Admiral Thrawn is, like straight up. And then they're sort of building to like this big crossover event where like the Ahsoka show and the Boba story and potentially like the Bo-Katan Mandalore story, are they, they're all going to like intersect into this like big superhero comic event, like Civil War.
The Mandalorian cinematic universe.
Yeah, and it's not what season 1 felt like in the slightest, and so people are very visibly, vocally frustrated with that, and I sympathize. It's, throughout the season, people kept saying things like, "Oh, I really don't like how this is becoming like, advertisements for spin-offs or whatever." I think I would have been an apologist for season 2 throughout the season, and then we sort of get to the finale, and I'm like, okay, I really hear those people now. I really see it now. That season 1 was its own contained, beautiful, new retelling of like the Star Wars myth, as you might put it. The sort of like told the themes with like a new overture.
Lens. Yeah. And the thing that gets me, and we'll get into the mythic stuff, is like, it's all there from a mythic perspective.
Yeah.
But again, just touching on the beats doesn't mean that you've earned it from a story and from a success factor perspective. Like, were you successful in telling Din Djarin's story in amongst all of these things? Because callbacks and like calling to other parts of the universe can be done successfully. I'm not saying that people should ever not do that. I think that adds a lot of power to the characters for people who are older fans or have all of this knowledge, but you always have to center it on the main character's perspective and understand what they understand and make sure that it means something to them. And although the choice of the Jedi showing up means something for Din, or going and seeing Luke, or going and seeing Ahsoka, the camera slightly, the lens of the eye of the audience leaves Din in those moments and focuses on Ahsoka, focuses on Luke, focuses on R2, focused on Boba, but Boba complimented Din in that he was an alternative Mandalorian, and so taught him more about himself. Do you know what I'm saying? So Boba was successful integrating in the show. I don't feel that Ahsoka was as successful in integrating into Din's specific journey with Grogu. I think she was more of an odd stopping point, and anyone could have delivered those messages. And again, anyone could have showed up on the ship as a Jedi. So what did it matter for Din? What did it change about Din that it was Luke or that it was Ahsoka? I don't think it did matter, and so they just kind of chose the big names to do things with. Okay. I just, did it matter? I don't know. And that makes me sad because I love seeing Luke on screen. I like Ahsoka. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm reminded of, there's like a Red Letter Media review of either Solo or Rogue One where they say something that hurt me at the time, which was like Star Wars is sort of a limited color palette that can only do so many things and can only say so many things. And I think they were, basically saying it's the Millennium Falcon and Jedi and Sith and bounty hunters, and that's all it will ever be. I felt like The Mandalorian season 1 and The Last Jedi and certain books, some of my favorite things of the last 5-10 years have kind of been the things that tried to push that envelope. And the Ken Liu short story collection that we always talk about, and just like various things like that are kind of like, how can we look at Star Wars a little bit differently and kind of just stretch the boundary just a little bit. And,
like saying the same thing but with a new analogy or a new way of thinking about it.
Yeah. And it felt like this season 2 finale was sort of like giving up a little bit and saying, like, it made me feel like I was questioning, were those red letter media guys right? Like, can Star Wars only be Luke doing Darth Vader's hallway scene with a different color lightsaber? The man fighting the machine instead of the machine fighting the man, or that, like, okay, we can do these cute little inversions. And
yeah. And really, like, is the question, was the choice to bring in Luke just because Luke wanted to, like, in somebody's mind creatively, they were like, yes, Yoda trained Luke, and now Luke's going to train a miniature Yoda? Was that the choice? But what does that matter to Din? I don't know.
I think that's the other thing that sort of like left me dissatisfied or hurt at the end of this episode, was this idea that, for 2 years we thought, or a year rather, we thought that like Grogu, Baby Yoda's purpose was to be this like bridging point between like all the eras of Star Wars, and like the foundlings are the future, and like, there is a Star Wars that exists beyond the Skywalkers, and it's unknowable, and we're not going to know it until we see it. And the idea that Grogu is just going to the temple that Luke Skywalker talked about in The Last Jedi, and we kind of like know how that all plays out. That's not what Grogu was supposed to be, with that whole like the foundlings are the future. That's not, you don't want your children to go to preschool if you know that preschool is like
yeah. And so people who haven't read the comics or maybe seen the sequel trilogy, and you're listening to this podcast, we know that basically Luke Skywalker sees darkness in his nephew Ben Solo, and like for a moment thinks about killing him. And then the temple is basically destroyed / like, Ben leaves on his own. There's a lot of questions about whether Ben actually destroyed the temple, but like that requires so much other knowledge. And like, is Luke the guy that you want to teach your son? I just like, it's so murky, and there's such an uphill battle for people to come on to Star Wars, and now you got to know the whole Skywalker saga to know that the thing that my kid cared about, Grogu, Baby Yoda, who's now gone with this guy. I did watch the episode with my son, and he didn't care that Grogu left with Luke Skywalker. He cared that Grogu left Din Djarin. Right? He's sad about that separation. And maybe that's the point. And if we knew Din was coming back, which of course he will, like they'll get back together. They have to. That is what the story is telling us. It just feels weird to say, oh, now we're going to, freeze there and go and look at Boba Fett for a while. Isn't that weird?
It is weird. And like the whole, the mythic structure of like going away from the community to go off and like have your adventure and like learn how to be a mature functioning adult or whatever in the world is also kind of a weird moment that we're doing this with Grogu now, because he's sort of coded as a toddler or whatever.
Yeah.
To use that infamous like coded terminology. He's like a 50-year-old 3-year-old. It's like weird.
He's okay. So in a 900-year-old lifespan, he's like 5, right? He's a preschooler, right? He had some trauma, so he wasn't remembering everything, but he's like 5. Okay, cool. I guess he's going off to school. Is that what we're saying from a parental perspective? Because it felt very similar, but I would still want to know where to pick up my kid every night or summer break.
I have this worry, right? I think we've kind of talked about this a little bit or hinted at it, but, people often talk about how the Clone Wars series sort of rehabilitated the prequels inside of sort of their mind, right? Like they weren't really a fan of the prequels, but the Clone Wars made them appreciate the prequels better, and now they like them or whatever because there's more story there and like they get the characters better. I think it's important to note that like Filoni loved the prequels, and so he then built on the prequels. And like there's like a sense that maybe Anakin's character, as played by Matt Lanter, has a little bit of a different sort of swagger and says some different things, but like for the most part, like that version of Obi-Wan is like a fairly good bridge between like Attack of the Clones Obi-Wan and like A New Hope Obi-Wan, and now we've got like this weird sort of chronological issue where The Last Jedi came out 3 years ago, and we know Luke's kind of like a sad failure when we catch up to him on Ahch-To, and like, but at the end of this, we're supposed to think like, okay, you know, our sort of little golden child, our hope for the future, you know, like our baby Yoda, you know, he's going off to like, you know, this great bright future that is not so great and bright. And so it doesn't feel like the current Star Wars that we're seeing, if this is kind of the way that it's going. It doesn't feel like how the Clone Wars took Revenge of the Sith and Attack of the Clones and were like, we're just going to go crazy and like build on those amazing 2 movies and kind of bridge them and just sort of build George Lucas's universe out. And like, you know, there's things like Mortis that people, you know, they either love it or they hate it because it is weird, but it's like, it's essentially like a part of the heart and soul and skeleton of what Star Wars is. And like, it fits, right? But
it's then the spleen. I love Mortis so much. So
yeah. And now it's just we're kind of in this weird place where like we see Grogu going off with Luke, and we look at like the Rise of Skywalker, and we're like, you know, to what extent are we doing the Clone Wars things where we're just building more scaffolding around the prequels, or are we doing like retcon territory? Are we trying to like rewrite history a little bit, you know?
It's called recontextualization, Alex.
Makes me nervous, but I did enjoy the season, but we're kind of like in that territory, right, where it's like you know, you start to worry about you know, whose canon is this, you know, is this Filoni's head canon, is this Jon Favreau's head canon, like his story group, you know, what kind of input are we getting here? But yeah, it's it does feel like this is just sort of the static Return of the Jedi Luke that we know and love from 1983 and 1997 that we sort of grew up with, right? Like, it doesn't feel like we're sort of headed to Last Jedi Luke. It's like they want us to forget about him a little bit. Potentially.
I mean, he doesn't hit that point until he hits that point, right? So I think that's fine. I think that choosing Return of the Jedi Luke is fine. I mean, it's only been 5 years. He's out traveling the galaxy, you know, looking for specimens and artifacts. That's literally like what we know from canon that he's doing right now. So he just shows up in his X-Wing, much like the Legends of Luke Skywalker, to collect the Holy Grail of Star Wars, which is Grogu, which is the only thing that they are marketing right now. Literally the most profitable item from a merchandising perspective is Baby Yoda. And they will find that out when nobody buys their t-shirts of any other character. So he will be back because he is the thing that makes the money.
Yeah. I'd buy a Fennec Shan t-shirt, but
that's fair.
Neither here nor there.
I'm paying like $40 for a Frog Lady shirt to have it delivered to Canada because I couldn't buy it in Canada. So
I love Frog Lady.
I mean, the passenger is my friend. I just, and I don't really want to talk about it more until we kind of, like, because we've talked about, like, what this episode did and how it affected the season. But I really do want to talk about some of the genre and mythic stuff, because I think that is actually quite cool about this episode, is that it still did plug into those things and overall, like, met certain beats that it really did need to meet. And when you squint, you're like, yes, this did its thing. But I still struggle with the execution.
I liked how it opened the same way A New Hope opened, with like one ship like boarding another ship. That's kind of cute. I don't know how much further I have to add to that, other than it sort of starts with that A New Hope opening and then sort of shifts into like Return of the Jedi mode, like all the way until the post-credits scene even. But
what do you mean by that?
Well, you know, then we sort of like get into the iconography of like the Rancors on the arms of the throne in Jabba's palace, and you know, just stuff with like I said, the posture of Moff Gideon when he's like on the ground, sort of defenseless and surrendering as like Vader out of Palpatine's throne room on the Death Star 2. Just like little things like that. It was nice to finally see the green lightsaber in action again. Like we really have only seen it in like flashback stuff, like in The Last Jedi. He was using the blue lightsaber in the sort of the fake out fight. It was nice to see that Luke again.
Yeah.
As much as we're kind of nervous and uneasy about the execution, but it to me, like when I was watching it, I was very much thinking about how it paralleled moments from the original trilogy rather than thinking like, where the Ahsoka episode did like the, Kurosawa thing or.
Yeah, like the only thing I could think of, it tied more, it was like referential from a shot perspective or from a feeling perspective of Star Wars in general, right? Like, so having the Rogue One hallway, man versus machine, rather than machine versus man shot, like having Luke basically mow through the Dark Troopers reverse of Rogue One, like you said. The only thing that I can think of that was very specifically Western was Din and Boba showing up at the cantina. I really love that establishing shot. We don't even know what planet we're on, but we know that planet has like, I don't know, some sort of refinery or industrialization, and it's like spread throughout the planet. And then they show up at this one place, park their ship. Like it's like a 2-horse town. And the 2 horses work for the cantina because it's literally like cantina. People park there and then they leave. It felt a little like Maz Kanata's castle, but like as like these watering holes that like all that exists is like factories in this one cantina on this planet. And then, that's very Western too. It's like the cantina in the middle of nowhere where everybody parks their horses, has a drink, and then carries on their way. And they show up and, you see the bartender, like she's almost in like an old fashioned dress, like a red dress. And she's like just shining a glass or something. And then like, that's all we kind of see of the cantina before they have their interactions. I miss cantina source music. More anybody going into a cantina next time, I want a band, please. Just I want Ludwig Göransson to have to make some source music, and what that would be and how weird that would be. I feel like that would be an add to the universe.
Yeah, I think like the score has really stood out in the last 2 episodes. Like it's got some new textures in there. Like I said, it did sort of the Terminator thing. I think there's like very like electronic textures in both the last 2 episodes.
He's very skilled with the synth. Yeah. But like from a genre perspective, it's more referential to Star Wars in general than it is to anything else. And that's okay. It's just, for something that was sold kind of as a Western, it seems like, especially this season, because of all of the other things that it's doing, it feels less and less like a Western.
Yeah, pretty much since that first episode. The first episode felt like season 1, and then ever since it's just been like, wait, what is this show now? There's like, we're in like a fishing town, like a little harbor, and then we're on Space, Iowa, with the little watering hole out that the farmers all meet up at. And,
Space, Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in like small town Illinois, and like, there's these little towns that are like a post office, a church, and a bar, and like that's it. And
I'm really okay with that. Like I'm okay with him traveling and seeing the different binomes of the galaxy, but like it just feels like, especially like how they presented it in the beginning, it's way more mythical than genre, and that's okay. It's just like, what is the sacrifice being made? Well, it didn't shares the spotlight with the other characters that they bring in.
Yeah, it's just distracting. There's not a lot of like negative space for your imagination to kind of like think like, we used to talk about like Din's subconscious and like, the armor's like little forge area and how it like represents this and that. And there's not a lot of room for that this season because we're so damn distracted by like, okay, so is Thrawn going to be in the show now? Like, do I like that? And just various kind of the residue that's all over this season with like Cara Dune and the actress and her Twitter presence and just all that stuff is so distracting all the time, everything. So yeah. It's weird that Boba and Fennec are like the the exciting, satisfying thing that's happening in this show that
when it should be Din.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the Din moments in this season have been wonderful. Like with Grogu, like whenever they've focused on them, like I want a supercut of like their moments together because I think that those are really valuable and wonderful. And it again is the heart of the show. And I struggle to think of like, I hope he's coming back because Grogu, I mean, because I feel like that is the heart, their relationship,
Mm-hmm. Ty, your normal co-host, she said something on Twitter about how this season just kind of lacks conflict, dramatic, normal nuts and bolts conflict. And I think that people loved last week's episode so much because Grogu was in Imperial custody and like Din was worried and, they're like infiltrating that base and they're having that whole like Inglorious Bastards like Tarantino scene where like we're sitting at the table with the Nazis kind of thing, having a drink, and like that's like that makes you nervous. It's scary, it's conflict, it's dramatically interesting, and when it's just like, oh well, like I guess this is the part where like Luke Skywalker's gonna show up and like I guess we're gonna beat Moff Gideon and Moff Gideon's not gonna win and everything's gonna be fine and everything's just gonna go according to plan. Like that's not conflict. Like when characters just kind of proceed as the dominoes fall. Like I don't know. There's no
if it's going to be the obvious choice, it has to feel earned.
Yeah, it has to feel inevitable and messy and complicated. And yeah, I mean, we're sad to see, the parent and the child get separated from each other like Shmi and Anakin or whatever. But that's about it as far as like in Last Jedi, right? Like Luke goes on the Falcon and R2 plays the hologram of Leia. And Luke says that was a cheap move, right? And like, this season has been like a lot of cheap moves. And like, I think Ryan in The Last Jedi is like actively
he understood that it was a cheap move and he calls it out in the text. So you're okay with it. Yes.
Yeah. Johnson was saying in The Last Jedi with that was a cheap move. That line is sort of saying like, I don't want to just make another Death Star and just like go through the motions. I want to push the boundaries a little bit and like, piss some fans off occasionally and kind of make them ask like, what's going on with the world between worlds? That's weird. What is happening? Like, that's when like Star Wars has been interesting in the Disney era. And it's like,
this feels like a step back.
There you go. Yeah.
I agree. So just going into kind of like some of the symbolic and mythic stuff that I saw and regathering of allies, we knew this was going to happen. This is like, hey, we're heading to the confrontation. You re-meet the mentors or the people that you ran into conflict with or your previous allies, and they all help you, right? You always have these people that have helped you along the way help you in the final confrontation. So this was totally expected. I was really I really liked this episode, but I felt weird after. And once I examined how I felt weird after, I needed to talk about that because I think it's really important. So like this all made sense for Din, for the story, for everything. I think it was just like a solid move to find the characters again. I'm not even caught up on how they do it. It's space magic. I don't really care. Like it's a fairy tale. They show up when they show up, right? You go and you're like, hey, let's go to this watering hole. I know they happen to be there. Like it's fine. I don't care, right? I actually don't even care that Luke showed up. Like really, I just don't. It had to have felt earned from a character perspective for Din. I'm always talking about for the main character, for the character that we're supposed to be viewing our lens through. Did you have any thoughts on the regathering of allies?
I mean, I like most of those characters, so it worked for me. Like, yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
actually, this was an episode where I actually had that same thought of like, oh, he just like knows that they happen to be on Space Iowa at this bar at this particular time. Like he was driving by and saw their car. Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I mean, I think that was done pretty well in season one, and then we're sort of like upping the stakes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess I would have missed Cobb Vanth, and I would have had Boba present, like you've pointed out. Like it's kind of there's no reason for him to like jump into hyperspace and run away. But yeah, what happened to Cobb Vanth? Like why didn't he come back?
Yeah. Hey, you have Frog Lady there. Like she's like the frog gentleman is babysitting the kiddos and she's like, I'm showing up to help you out. Like I would have loved everybody showing up. It would have been fine.
Yeah.
You
I think
know?
Ahsoka's got her whole thing, but like
Yeah. Like I wouldn't even have
Cobb Vanth's
cared
not
if and then we could have gotten an Ahsoka Luke moment and be like, I knew your dad and he was redeemed. I would have loved that. Whatever. Like regathering any allies makes sense to me from a mythic perspective. So when Din faces these droids and they did it really well by Dr. Parshing laying out that the Dark Troopers were now droids, you kind of saw a movement of Din's helmet. And that's because droids are literally his shadow. They are the thing that like killed his home world. They are a darkness that he always has to face and he always has to repeatedly confront. And so having him face the one droid that's like beating the crap out of him until he remembers who he truly is and stabs it through the neck with the Mandalorian spear, the Beskar spear, like that to me symbolically was really well done.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's also that whole thing in Star Wars where like droids are not like all one thing. Like they represent like where they come from. Like R2D2 is like a reflection of who Luke is, or Padme, and whatever the case may be.
We saw that really well done in the first season with IG and like the reprogramming and that whole monologue and the space to live in that moment was so well done by Deborah Chow.
Exactly. Yeah. And then so here we have them as like a reflection of the cold, like sort of the imperial machinery that marches on even in Palpatine's absence, because it's just about power and control and being on the winning side, that sort of thing. So it's nice to see that this can coexist in the show with like IG-11, as we were talking, you mentioned, it's kind of droids in Star Wars have their own kind of unique magic where, there's not a lot of rules about what droids can and have to be. Like we have battle droids and we have L3.
Yeah.
And it's
messy. We have battle droids that have been like sort of reprogrammed too, right? So there's complexity in droids, and they're still like one of my favorite aspects of Star Wars that like I continuously go back to and say this is interesting storytelling. And believe me, I was very excited to see that there's going to be a droid story like show. If it's just C-3PO and R2D2 on adventures, I'm still cool with that. Like I love them. Agreed. So when he spears the droid, like he is literally spearing his past and like moving past that fear of droids, even though it was in the process of overcoming him. I thought that was really well done. And then Moff Gideon and the confrontation with him was very good. Like, literally fighting the devil. Like the voice that he used to be like, you want this saber, and the temptation towards each of the characters that wanted the saber was so well done, because he is representing like this darkness within Din himself, but also within the story. He is right now the devil because we have no Palpatine. And Palpatine was the devil of Star Wars. Right now, Moff Gideon is the devil of Star Wars at this point in the story. And even though he is bound and tied and not gagged on the ground, he is still pushing conflict between Bo-Katan and Din Djarin. That conflict is being laid the groundwork for.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, very much like that sort of the Palpatine figure in Return of the Jedi, or even, Revenge of the Sith, where it's like, or in Rise of Skywalker, where he doesn't seem to have like a concrete plan. It's sort of like, I'm just going to like create a little bit of chaos and see how this plays out, because I know I'll be fine. It's the galaxy. We should be worried about these good people who are not yet corrupted. Like, I'll just sort of inject some chaos and evil and see what happens here, that kind of thing.
What was his plan again? I don't know. Yeah.
And he harvested Grogu's blood, so who knows what's going to come of that. Like,
yeah, it's like, but I mean, they also have the ship, so it's like, was the blood somewhere else? Like, did he send it away? Open questions. Yeah. It's fine. Yep. It's fine. Yep. The unhelmeting moment, I mean, we've earned this season. It needed to happen. He needed to take it off of his own volition and show his face to Grogu, who is, his heart, and Grogu touches his face. We knew this was going to happen. It was wonderful. I loved this moment so much. Pedro Pascal sold the hell out of this. The puppet was wonderful. I wanted to cry. Like, so good. Yeah. It represented so much symbolically too. Like, he's finally at a point where he can remove his helmet and be his own person, right? His shell is, he's taken off his hard armor. He's taken off his shell. He's taken off his protection to show him truly his true self to somebody else, and to share that with somebody else.
Yeah. And it's not enough to just like sort of logically, like Bo-Katan or Migs Mayfeld, like, you can't just be like, well, Mando, it's ridiculous that you won't take off your helmet. It's like, it has to be like an appeal to the spirit, like Omera did in like episode 4 in season 1. Like, yeah, the sort of like touching of the face was sort of like a callback to Omera a little bit, in this idea that, like,
oh yeah,
right? She touched
love. It's love. Like, that is a love, representation of love.
Yes. Yeah.
And familial, like, connection too.
Yep.
Now he's no longer a clan of 2.
Yeah.
I said.
Yeah, I wrote in my recap something like, this looks like it's goodbye for Clan Mudhorn, and I'm just like, Jesus, that's the most depressing thing I've ever written. Like, what? So it can't be the end of that story. I hope not, but
So, like, moving on to separations, like, separations fulfill several things story-wise. Like, so for Grogu to advance and grow and become a semi-functional piece of the story, he has to be able to walk around on his own and be not a toddler, right? He can't be a toddler on screen. He can't be constantly being carried around by other people, except for when they need to move fast, right? He has to be his own thing. And unfortunately, he can't be if he's constantly with Din. And so separations, especially for Din as well, Din needs to miss him and understand what is missing about his life without him. Grogu needs to miss Din, but then they also need to grow up separately, right? So Din is going to hopefully understand that he has an obligation to the Mandalorians as a whole, and that's an important thing for him to understand and know his obligations to that. But he also needs to understand that he loves and needs Grogu. Grogu needs to advance as a character to become more able to walk / function / help the plot on his own, make it make sense so he doesn't like pass out every time he uses the Force. And then he can show back up in Din's life and be an actual character, right? I'm sad we didn't get words from Grogu before he left.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that would have been like a really big thing, but it could be like the next time we see them together too.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, Yoda is like one of the great talkers in Star Wars. Like most of the quotable lines that people who haven't even seen Star Wars kind of know are like Vader and Yoda and Leia and things like that, and Han Solo. And yeah, with like, I think of like quiet children. I think of my own son. I think of cousins I've had that were, as very young children, were really quiet and not talkative. It's really once they can, like, they have to get away from their parents and go to kindergarten and first grade. That's when they're forced to talk because they don't have their mother there to say, like, I know exactly what you want, honey. Here's the thing you're not telling me because I know innately because I'm your parent. They have to communicate in the outside world, like beyond the safety of like home or whatever. So yeah, it makes sense. There's so much about this episode that makes sense, but it just
I like it, and it makes sense from a structure perspective, from a mythic beat perspective. Like the separation, he's going off to kindergarten, he's going off to school. This works, especially if he comes back.
Yes.
It doesn't work for me if the separation is permanent. He needs to be healed of some of his trauma to do with the Jedi. And for a short period of time, Luke is, I'm sure, an awesome mentor until he is faced with the shadow of his own guilt to do with his father through Ben Solo. And maybe he can help Grogu during this period of time. And then he gets reunited and Grogu is more advanced and more able to function as an autonomous figure within the plot. That's what I would hope for. And symbolically, like, separations are actually a big thing for characters. And they do need to happen. And I'm really okay with it as long as it means that they'll get back together.
Yeah, to their credit, we know that Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni are aware of the parallel with like Anakin because of that Ahsoka episode, The Jedi, whatever, chapter 13 or whatever it was. She warns like, I can't take this kid and train him because I've seen what happens when you take a kid who's not ready to be separated and, or too sort of volatile and you train him and he's powerful, but sort of, basically she doesn't want Grogu to be Darth Vader 2.0. So we kind of know that Dave and John are aware of that.
I'm gonna be arguing this probably until the day that I die. Luke learned in Return of the Jedi that attachment is not the bad thing that it is said to be, that it is both his love and being a Jedi. Loving the universe and your father. Loving the universe includes loving the hateful person that your father has become, and that you will not fight him.
Mm-hmm.
That attachment is what saves him. And so Luke is one of the people that can understand that Din needs to be reunited with Grogu. I'm struggling with the earning it at this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. The sword is back in Mandalorian's hands. This is important. The legend is the important thing, not the sword, as Gideon said, right? Mm-hmm. The tale, the storytelling, what it means, what it represents is important to the story. And I totally agree.
Yeah, that was a good moment. Really good line.
And Din being the one to have it is also very from a sacred story, from a mythic perspective, from like hero's perspective, is actually also very important because oftentimes it's the most reluctant person who is thrust with power, right? So you're the most reluctant person. You're Moses. You're the, Prince of Egypt, and you're told you're going to save all these people, right?
Frodo's the one who's happy in the Shire. Like Bilbo wants to leave, but Frodo is happy being a little farm boy goofing off with Gandalf, but
most reluctant who will serve.
He must be the one to deliver the ring or whatever. Yeah. So it's Din ending up with the sword it's good for that whole conflict thing we were talking about earlier. And for sure.
Bo being the one who wants it, I do have a slight comment because literally she's handed the sword by Sabine in Rebels. It's brought to her and no fighting happened and then she owns it. It's fine. I mean, Gideon could have just been BSing or something that Bo told Gideon when Gideon's like, hey, give me that sword. And then he beats her in single combat. I don't know. That seems weird. that they like included that and that was the story or whatever. And like Rebels showed us differently. So it like, what is the truth? I guess now live action is the truth. It like, that's fine that single combat is required for the sword. I kind of just hope that we have like a scene at some point where Bo is like always trying to pick a fight with Din and like he refuses to fight her. I just think that would be just so awesome.
I will not fight you.
I will not
she's like,
fight
oh
you.
no, we're fighting.
And he's like, just take the sword. And she's like, chucks it at him to be like, no, we got to fight with this. She's like trying to arm wrestle him to like get him to like beat him against. I enjoy the contrast of Din being like the tired dad who's like, nah, here, just take it. Like, I don't care. I'm not fighting anybody. To like, Casca and Boba like flamethrowering each other in the middle of a bar. Like, that's sort of a nice like. I don't know. Yeah, it's like the Mandalorian stereotypes are true sometimes, and sometimes like it's just I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I do think that like now that the sword has been chosen, like I do think that that's where they're going with the story, but I don't know. I mean, there is something mythically there to say the most reluctant who will serve, right? So the concept of because Bo wanted it, she wasn't the right person to have it. She's more like a Sir Kay who served Arthur, right? Rather than Arthur.
Sure.
God, there's so many Arthur parallels now, like orphaned, abandoned, there's tons of that going on. Sir Kay wanted the sword, wanted to be king, wanted to be, and ended up being the seneschal. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. It is interesting that Bo-Katan, she wants to lead her people, and to the point that it's becoming that sort of like obvious choice, like Luke coming to, be the Jedi to take Grogu. So it makes you wonder, how are they going to complicate that? Is she therefore the rightful ruler? Are we going to be introduced to? Are
they going to get married?
Sabine, or are they going to get married? Is Sabine
she's a princess?
Show up?
Boba kept on calling her princess. I loved it so much.
I don't know if has she been referred to as a princess before? I don't recall.
No, I didn't
think so. Yeah, I didn't think so either. But I liked that. Yeah, I mean, it was a nice little kind of their jabs at each other were fun. Like
I enjoyed that.
Calling Django his donor, like oh man. Brutal.
Your donor. Oh God.
That was good.
And then, I do think there is something to say like, hey, this book of The Mandalorian, book 1 has been closed off. And then you start out, because every new beginning comes from some other's beginning's end in the semisonic closing time sense of the word, right? Or an Ouroboros or the hero's journey itself, right? Every new story comes from some other story's end.
Yeah.
It just felt weird to have it be like the Book of Boba. And then we were like, wait, where's Din? So is it like the center changes to Boba's story now? Like, are we lost? Like, are they trying to gain time? I don't know. Again, this show hit all of the mythic beats it needed to. It came to a conclusion from a journey perspective. Din accomplished his task. He brought the child to a Jedi. Yay! It didn't feel like a win, though, because the elixir that he brought back was the sword, but everything was off. He lost the child. The sword was not in the hands of who he promised it to be. Everything feels slightly off center. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's like the equivalent of a darker middle chapter for this show.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that would be the intention, and it played out that way. I guess Star Wars is always playing the long game, and originally we had like Lucas just doing everything. So when the prequels like finally came out, you knew that he knew where the dots had to kind of go. But then with like Solo, right? It's like part one of a 3-act play, and then we don't get Solo 2 really thus far. And so that's just where it gets a little like nerve wracking as like a fan, right? Because now it's just sort of like, okay, so is Boba season 3? Is it a spin-off show? Is Bo gonna be season 4 or 5? Or I mean, that's just the thing, is like we no longer like kind of know what's gonna happen next. And people just get antsy, and I sympathize with that more and more. Just the kind of not knowing of, like, how is this structured then? Like the Book of Boba Fett title card was just like what? This kind of weird,
and it was like a
moment.
Post-credit scene, very like MCU like, which to me, like, I don't have a problem with Boba's story. I think they've redeemed Boba in this season, certainly, but I wanted a Din Djarin season fully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We used to have the episode, 4, 5, and 6, 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9 structure. And so we kind of know like which number comes before and after all the other of the 9 numbers. And now we're kind of in just, the unknown regions of just like, what is Rogue Squadron going to be about? What is that? When you get to a title like the Book of Boba Fett, it's exciting, but you just don't know the shape of the structure anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what are they trying to say? And so, like, I've talked with a lot of people, in today, and like, reading the Boba Fett text on the back of that throne. That was Josh Johnson who like pointed that out to me. So like, he's been on the show before, and he's really awesome. And I talked to Laura about stuff. I talked with Ty. Like I've talked with so many people because there was a lot to process about this episode. And I personally think that they needed more time to pull all the threads together. And they had, like, how long ago were they talking about, did we hear the rumors of a Boba Fett show? Like,
oh, sure.
4 or 5 years? Like, it's almost been since TFA came out.
Yeah, like, I think in the Art of books, like, Showstack talks about, like, a Han Solo movie being in development as far back as, like, 2012. And, like, and I think, like, the reporting, word on the street was that, like, a Boba Fett movie was in the works, around that era, like, 2013, like, way back.
So, like, I'm wondering if they were like, Boba's coming back and we've got this Mandalorian show, but we're going to try to make it this larger, like, cross-pollination event across all of these different properties. But we need some more time to make sure all of the different cards are in place, or the different pieces. Like, we need a year. And they're like, we already have a Boba Fett story in mind. Let's talk about Boba Fett, where he's at, and get him all primed and ready. And then we'll bring back Din and tell, like, the Mandalorian the Mandalorian cinematic universe story.
Yeah.
And, like, I just think, and this will totally be a knock on Jon Favreau's writing, he needs a writer's room.
Oh, sure. Yeah. He
needs people to challenge him on decisions, because he wrote most of this season, and Rick Famuyiwa's episode is my favorite.
Yes,
that he wrote.
He wrote and directed 15, right? Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You need some different people to challenge you on ideas, Jon Favreau.
Yes.
I just feel that way.
If, when we watch the behind the scenes gallery, the Disney gallery thing on Disney Plus with John and Kathy and all those guys, when they're sort of sitting around the table, and you notice something about Jon Favreau, which is that he's the coolest, nicest, smartest guy, but he does interrupt people and talk over them a lot. And he's very much wants to be the center of attention. And like Deborah Chow doesn't get many words in, and that series, and Kennedy will start to tell an anecdote, or John Knoll from ILM will start to tell an anecdote, and Favreau will interrupt them, right? Like, and that's not to like say he's like a bad guy, but like it is part of his character that he's a bit of a control freak or something. I don't know. Like, he needs to trust the people that he has, he's sort of built this dirty dozen of like Taika Waititi and, Rick and like all these brilliant people who made season 1 great,
what was wonderful about that season was that there was diversity of thought in the room as creators.
Yeah.
And you can tell that come out in my 2 favorite episodes of the season, which is the one directed by Bryce Dallas Howard and the one directed by Rick. I liked episode 1 too. It was fine. It
was fun.
Yeah. But
I liked Robert Rodriguez's too. That was pretty fun.
But he gave him 19 pages of script, and there could have been way more given to Grogu's experience to also make the ending feel earned.
Yeah.
Right?
No, for sure.
Yeah. Like, that's the thing that I struggle with. Like, I liked so much about this episode, but why do I feel after, it's because some of these things just took away from the story, and endings matter, right? You can have a rough middle patch as long as you land and stick the ending. This just felt off for me personally. I still loved seeing Luke. I still loved seeing R2-D2. I still have critique, though, because I think it's important to critique something you love in the hopes that it will become better, stronger, faster, and plug into the symbolism and the mythic storytelling, but also make it feel like a wonderful story for the characters.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I don't want to keep like bashing on John or Dave Filoni, but there's also this sense too that like, well, Filoni, is not really, he's kind of a newcomer to the live action world, but Jon Favreau helped build the Marvel universe that led to the most profitable film ever made. Like, he's a guy who probably has a big ego now. And I think that a lot of the Star Wars that's happened in recent years that I really loved are these people who come to the room and have a lot to prove, like somebody like...
Well, and John had a lot to prove with the first season, right? So think about that. He was scared it was going to fail. I'm sorry, but fear makes you careful.
Yeah.
Right? Fear is not the enemy. Fear also helps you.
Yeah.
It's what you do with that fear. Oh, off my horse.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's something to be said for somebody like Deborah Chow or Ryan Johnson, who had kind of done like, Brick and stuff like in Looper and even like,
even Bryce, like what she contributed. She was a brand new director, Bryce Dallas Howard.
Yes. And like the leap from like her first episode to her second one, it's like she learned so much.
Yeah.
And I loved her first episode, but like you can see the growth there. Like you just do. Like she really went to school, I guess, that first episode that she did. And again, people like Ken Liu with the Luke Skywalker short story collection. It's like people who like get invited to the Star Wars table and like they're like, how the hell did I get here? Like, holy shit. Like they have to prove that like they've got something that they're doing, that matters. And so, when you get around to the second season, it is like that sort of sophomore slump. And it was nice to see Rick write his episode for sure.
Yeah. And again, there's things I loved about this season. I just feel like it's going to kind of feel like the pilot for so many other things. And that to me is sad. Like, because I wanted it to be Din's season. I wanted it to be, focused on him. And it can still be the pilot for other things. People will naturally like go to those other stories and those other plot lines if first the core is solid. Is the core solid? I don't know.
I understand the thinking. From a business perspective, Mandalorian is this like smash success last year, and it's like they're going to put all their eggs in that basket. But it's like, how many eggs can the basket hold? How many eggs can Frog Lady carry or whatever? I don't know. But yeah, it's like, yeah, I mean, sometimes the business strategy and a creative vision are two different things. And so
it definitely felt like some executive choices were made this season.
Yeah.
I definitely think that they're heading towards a massive Mandalorian war. Probably not next year because we get the Book of Boba Fett. I absolutely do think that that's what the next season is going to be. I think it'll be the next season after that they will basically explore the Mandalorian, like regaining of Mandalore is a big, massive event.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Alex, thoughts?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I kind of repeated myself a couple times in some ways, but I had a lot to say about this one. I think sometimes people invite me to guest on a podcast and I'm like, okay, let me write up my 6 little bullet points of things that I have to say. And here I just had like a wall of text, just a manifesto of the things that I felt coming out of this Luke thing. But I mean, it was cool.
And I do want to say, like, if you loved it, like I loved feeling this way while experiencing it. I just have reservations and I want it to be more solid and stick with us. Like, will we remember this as a magical thing that we need to rewatch? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to ask myself, again in a couple of months, was this a spectacle or was this fulfilling? I don't know.
Yeah.
As a season,
Yeah. What's the armor up to? I miss her. I don't know.
Yeah, I miss her too. Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, I'm glad we got like Grief Karga back. I mean, I'm glad that, Bo-Katan showed up again and Casca and things like that. But yeah, it's, I'm curious too, like, will this be something that I revisit the way I revisit certain episodes of Rebels or, what have you? Be interesting. I'm excited about the Boba Fett stuff. I'm excited about that. But
felt weird to add it on the end, unless it was just like a full straight up warning. Hey, this is going to be next season.
Yeah,
get ahead of it.
A little different, but I guess maybe they want us to sit with the knowledge for a year that, hey, season 3 is going to be a different direction. But season 2 felt like a different direction too. So I don't know. Yeah, a little weird.
I know lots of people have said that maybe the Mandalorian refers to the Mandalorian people, right?
Yeah.
And if that's the direction they're going, okay. I signed up for the Din and Kid show.
Yeah. No, I feel similarly. I think that it's, you can play that trick like The Last Jedi, like, oh, that means Luke, but no, it actually means Rey and it means both. But yeah, I mean, I think that for me, I'm the same way. I signed up for Pedro Pascal and his charisma at that, that celebration panel in 2019 where I'm like, wow, these guys really believe in their vision. And Pedro is so excited. And like, wow, Carl Weathers, he's like such a cool guy. I'm glad he's in the show. And, Favreau saying like, I've been going to Jedi school with Filoni. Like that was such a good kind of just, it was like, this is something new and unexpected. And like, I'm so happy for Pedro. And now we're kind of, spinning out of that orbit a little bit and it makes me sad, but, we'll see. I mean, hopefully it comes back around.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope they refined their center, and there is problems with I have problems with the storytelling in this season that are, outside of the mythic beats, because again, it hits the mythic beats. So like, I have no problems on that perspective. And yes, I can be contradictory on my own podcast and love some things and also wish that some things were done better. I love the Boba Fett that existed in this season. And so if they're continuing some sort of really interesting journey with him, am very interested in seeing that.
Yeah.
Plus, I love Fennec Shan as a character. I think she's just amazing. And the fact that she's like in this weird life debt Chewie Han situation with Boba Fett like adds so much interest to his character. Like I love it so much. So I mean, again, I'm fine with that being a story that they tell. It just feels weird to be like, and now the Boba Fett show. Like, it just feels so weird. So it's like, what was the decision that went into that? Maybe they needed more time. I just wish they would be like, I don't know, honest about it and be like, you know, we needed some more time because we're putting together this larger thing instead of us having to presume or read the writing on the wall or whatever.
Yeah. I feel like my tastes shifting too, where like in 2016 with Rogue One, like when you put like somebody who looks like Cassian Andor next to somebody who looks like Felicity Jones's Jyn Erso, I wasn't like, oh, I hope something romantic develops here. I didn't think that for a minute. I was like, this is very much like Mad Max and Furiosa, just kind of getting job done together. But with Boba and Fennec, I'm like, oh, they're cute. I
well, you ship them.
I like the way she was leaning on his throne there at the end. I was like, good for you, man. Like, that
would be interesting. I would read that. I would watch that. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if they're gonna go that way, but it'll be interesting. It seems like a certain segment of fandom that you might expect to be like not happy with the way Fett has kind of evolved in this season. Like so far, I think they kind of are like the sort of like mainstream, masculine edgelord fans who have always loved Boba Fett. Like they still kind of dig this portrayal, I think, for the most part. But like, will they still dig it if he's like, a sweet, adoring husband with Fennec? I don't know, but
God, I would love that so much. Oh my God! I
want them to go that route. I don't know. I like again. give us the new and. I mean, God, last season people thought Fennec was dead out there in the desert, and I was like, Jesus, like if they
love
really...
what they've done with her this season, and I just wanted more. Like I wanted her to be so important, and with this show, she will be. I just want, I just want a woman in the front of a show again. I do, and we haven't gotten that just yet. But if she's more of an equal to him, like, and it turned romantic, I would be like, I would die. I would die. This is amazing.
She's so cool, and like they're putting her in the Bad Batch to kind of develop her further. So I think they know people like really like her, and
God, just
we've
let
come a long way
women
from her line.
Like love their badass boyfriends or girlfriends. Like, just give women love.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. We could talk
let them be happy
about that in Star Wars, but it's like
the after hours of Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim, us talking about who we ship Boba Fett with.
Yeah, well, everybody in the show is so damn good looking, It's
I know, and we haven't had any romantic hints this season, which also made me super sad. He needs. Maybe during the separation he'll have a dark temptation from a dark lady and meeting with the goddess. Please. Yep. Okay, sorry.
I like it.
I'm gonna daydream about when Din shows up again.
I'm excited. I'm cautiously optimistic. Like, I'm on the ride, sometimes when you get on a roller coaster, you don't know how long it's going to be, and you don't know how scared you're going to be or if you're going to be sick afterward. But for now, I remain on the ride that is Star Wars, and I'm hopeful and excited. So
I'm probably going to be processing this for a while. So
definitely.
That's where I'm at. I love Din Djarin. I love Grogu, and I hope that they're doing well.
Same.
Well, Alex, thanks for coming on Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim again.
Yeah.
The door is always open. I know that you had a very busy life this season specifically, but You're always welcome to come back.
Yeah. I'm hoping to have like an office with a door that I can just kind of do this thing more often when people ask me. So yeah, hopefully I'll be doing more podcast stuff.
Well, you are welcome back on What the Force anytime that you want. I love having you here. So where can people find you and what you are doing online?
Oh gosh, like I just got done recapping the season 2 for Reviewed, which is like a segment of usatoday.com. And then I'm now going to be working for them full time starting in January. So I'll be kind of working behind the scenes. Otherwise, I'm at on Twitter goofing off at Alex J. Kane. And I've got a newsletter I just started, which is like you can find it at alexjkane.substack.com. And my plan is just to kind of like write stuff there. Like I think I'm going to write something about like the Lego Star Wars holiday special soon and how like that kind of did some things for me that the rest of Star Wars didn't this year.
Didn't you love the Sheevdemption?
Sheevdemption, old Sheevy Palpatine. Yes, that was so good. Yes. Just so much of that stuff. Yeah. And Finn with a lightsaber in his hand.
Yeah.
Again. And just, and Rey kind of like mourning Ben retroactively and Poe being like a lovable, charming goofball where, he didn't quite get to do that much. And
people can also pick up your book.
Oh yeah, I have a book.
That you wrote about Star Wars, oddly.
Knights of the Old Republic from Boss Fight Books came out last year, like during Celebration. Yeah.
And you can always go back and listen to the episodes that we did together for the first season, which were so good and awesome. If you want to check those out, we talk about all the mythic and genre stuff in the first season. If you love hearing Alex's very relaxing voice.
Don't know about all that, but thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for coming on the show. And I hope you have a happy holidays. Cheers. Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is orchestral music by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We would like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love and are obsessed with What the Force. Brad, Cheryl Bell, Melody, Night Huntress, In Wild Space, Felicia, How Rude, Anna Perez, Macau Mom, Neil, James, Joe Allen D, Christian Luca, Josh Johnson, Scott C, and Marvin. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or any podcast app. It helps other people find the show. Check out our other channel, What the Fiction, for non-Star Wars content. You can connect with us on Twitter at WT Force Show, What the Force Podcast on Facebook, and our website where we have expanded our content to include reviews, metas, and articles, whattheforce.ca. Or on our Discord, links are all in the liner notes. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.